This peer-reviewed data is from the University of Chicago Oriental Institute Nubian Expedition, Volume 4. The title is Neolithic A Group and Post-A Group Remains from Cemeteries WVSQT and A Cave East of Cemetery K by Bruce Bayer Williams. Cultural area. In anthropology and geography, a cultural area, cultural region, cultural sphere, or cultural area refers to a geography with one relatively homogeneous human activity or complex of activities. Such activities are often associated with a ethno-linguistic group and with the territory it inhabits. Specific culture often do not limit their geographic coverage to the borders of a nation state or to smaller subdivisions of a state. History of concept. A culture area is a concept in cultural anthropology in which a geographic region and time sequence is characterized by substantially uniform environment and culture. The concept of culture areas was originated by museum curators and ethnologists during the late 1800s as a means of arranging exhibits. The concept is criticized by some who argue that the basis for classification is arbitrary, but other researchers disagree, and the organization of human communities into cultural areas remains a common practice throughout the social sciences. The definition of culture areas is enjoying a resurgence of practical and theoretical interests as social scientists conduct more research on processes of cultural globalization. Bruce Williams states, although the cave behind Cemetery K is the northernmost site that can be included in the Opcon culture, it is not the culture's northernmost connection. Kaiser has identified a widespread, if sparsely distributed, Neolithic culture in Upper Egypt, which he identified as a Tassian culture, extending far beyond the confines of Middle Egypt where it was first identified. The greater Tassian culture had important relations with the Neolithic cultures of Sudan and the Sahara. These relations are emphasized in a striking way by the appearance of flared incise beakers in the Sudanese Neolithic burials at Kadada near Shindi, and a small model beaker in a burial at Napta in the western desert near Lower Nubia. Bruce Williams states, the archaeological evidence from Upper Egypt is neither dense nor definitive, but it is reasonable to reconstruct a very sparse settlement for the region during the late Neolithic along the lines suggested by Kaiser. The interrelations among the various Upper Egyptian archaeological groups are not a subject for discussion here, but it is reasonable to note that during this period the density of occupation reconstructed for Upper Egypt is hardly more than a second cataract area. The relationship between the culture of Upper Egyptian Neolithic and those of contemporary Nubian and Sudan was strong enough for these cultures to be included in the same cultural sphere. The significant features these cultures shared continue to be recognizable in Nubia for some time. The Gebel Sheikh Suleiman Inscription found in Nubia, dated to Naqada III and Dynasty 0, would prove this same cultural sphere, as we observe pharaonic elements in Nubia. The interpretation of this relief as far as dates are widely disagreed upon by scholars. For example, French Egyptologist Pierre Tallet from University of Paris 4th and Claire Somaglina would argue that this relief dates to Dynasty 1 instead of 0. Pierre Tallet would agree that the date agreed upon by the consensus of scholars is Dynasty 0 before Dynasty 1, although they argue this date. Pierre Tallet and So Maglina would interpret this scene of relief as the Egyptians conquering Nubians. But Bruce Williams' interpretation, as I'm analyzing both arguments, would seem more accurate due to other uniform iconography of prisoners being carried off by the conquered, holding the captive from the back position. Let's examine. Bruce Williams states, this revision of the interpretation would leave the monument as follows. Left to right, the scene includes an unnamed Sarek surmounted by a falcon presiding over a victorious battlefield. Above and in front of this prisoner is a round-top hut that is probably his name or that of his country. The hut is above a long rope, shape attached to the man's throat. Below him, and the bark are sprawled, a number of slain men. Before them, toward the Sarek, are two incised town signs, one surmounted by a falcon and the other with a placenta or Khan symbol on it. Both face the Sarek. Before them is a water sign, beyond which is a prisoner standing facing the ship with his arms held or bound behind his back by an archaic bow or cord. The Sarek has panels and recesses, and the panel above is filled with dots. The falcon that perches on the Sarek was originally rather upright, and his wing is shown by a mark. If we consider the existence of an A-group dynasty using the Sarek at Qustul, then the monument is much better understood as an A-group record of victory than as an Egyptian one. The falcon is facing north. The bow can hardly label the prisoner if it is behind him. It seems to bind or hold him in a manner that the standard holds the prisoner on the lion pallet. The two town signs labeled or dominated by the falcon and the placenta, and possibly the hut, appear to indicate places in Egypt as victims. Bruce Williams' examination will be the most accurate as it concerns the tradition of the conqueror subduing his enemies, as it always appears behind the conquered. A further example is examined on the Gebel Sheikh Suleiman graffito, as we clearly see the conqueror is behind the prisoner subduing him, in which a scorpion is in front of him. This would relate to the bow represented as Nubia is also behind a prisoner, indicating that Ta Smau is conquering its enemies. Bruce Williams states, though these last may be doubted because they are faint, the references to Pharaoh implicit in the Sarek or palace facades themselves are not subject to such doubts, and the representation on the Qustul incense burner is explicit. The persons buried in the great tombs of Cemetery El at Qustul were pharaohs. The question then to be asked is, where did they originate? Since a victory over Upper Egypt is recorded, that country was presumably not their homeland. Both objects and practices indicate that these pharaohs belonged to Nubia. A number of early objects and monuments refer to this region in the same way as Ta Smau. Cemetery El was clearly the A-group royal cemetery of Ta Smau at Qustul. Although the jurisdiction and significance of the rulers buried there may not have been limited, whether or not the Gebel Sheikh Suleiman monument represents an actual A-group victory, it does indicate an episode in the struggles between the A-group and Upper Egypt before the establishment of the First Dynasty. In any case, this is not the only record of an A-group victory over Upper Egypt, for the L19 painted bowl actually makes the explicit claim of a victory over Ta Smau, and the group on the jaw from L6 shows a vulture tearing at a sign of necking. University of Chicago states, how did Nubia relate to Egypt during the A group? The scenes depicted on the Qustul incense burner have excited considerable interest and discussion. Why would seemingly Egyptian symbols have been used in Nubia? One interpretation is that Nubian A group rulers and early Egyptian pharaohs used related royal symbols. Similarities in rock art of A Group Nubia and Upper Egypt support this position. In another position is, another view suggests that the decoration was carved by Nubians in imitation of Egyptian art and rituals. In this perspective, A Group Nubian rulers would have emulated the symbols of Egyptian pharaohs, whose prestige and power were evident. University of Chicago give best advice. They state, the best chances of resolving this question lie in further exploration of areas of Nubia that are still accessible, and in excavation in the centers of early Egypt, where further evidence of the development of pharaonic traditions may be found.